In the long road to redemption, James Cooper, a loyal employee nearing retirement, is unexpectedly fired by ambitious new CEO, Ethan Blackwood. As the company starts to fall apart, Ethan begins to realize the value of the man he cast aside. Will James return to help save the company, or is it too late to fix the damage? Let me know in the comments. Could you forgive a boss like Ethan? And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of loyalty, redemption, and second chances. James Cooper, 58, stood at the entrance to his office, taking in the bustling sights and sounds of a corporate world he had been part of for 35 years. His heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sadness as he realized he was only weeks away from his retirement. The career that had been his life was nearing its end, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. His corner desk was cluttered with memories, photos of company picnics, awards from employee appreciation events, and handwritten notes of thanks from colleagues young and old. James was a man everyone respected. As one of the company's longest-serving employees, he was a mentor to many, including Melissa Rivers, a bright accountant in her early 20s. That morning she approached him nervously, holding a file in her hands. "Mr. Cooper, could you help me with this? I'm having trouble with the projections." James smiled warmly. "Of course, Melissa. Let's take a look." As he reviewed her work, offering guidance with his usual patience, Melissa sighed in relief. "I don't know what he'll do when you're gone. You always know how to make sense of these things." James chuckled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "You'll be just fine, Melissa. You're smart, and you have a good head on your shoulders. But thank you for the kind words." Their conversation was interrupted by Tom Jefferson, a senior manager and one of James' closest friends at the company. "Hey, James, we're all going to miss you around here. You sure you want to leave us?" James smiled, though the question stirred something inside him. "It's time, Tom. 35 years, I think I've earned some rest." As James and Tom shared a moment of camaraderie, the office buzzed around them, full of life and routine, though soon all of that would change. Upstairs, in a newly furnished executive office, Ethan Blackwood, the 30-year-old new CEO, gazed out the window with cold determination. Ethan was a rising star, hired to modernize the company and push it into the future. He had little patience for what he saw as the old guard, the long-serving employees like James, who in his mind represented stagnation and inefficiency. Ethan sat at his sleek mahogany desk, reviewing employee records. One name stood out: James Cooper. 35 years, Ethan muttered to himself. Impressive but outdated. As he read through James' file, Ethan saw only numbers: an old employee with a high salary, one of the company's biggest costs. The personal relationships, the decades of loyalty, and the mentorship James provided meant nothing to him. In Ethan's mind, the future lay with younger, cheaper, more tech-savvy employees who could drive the company forward. Ethan leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the desk. He was determined to make his mark, to show the board that he wasn't afraid to make tough decisions. His restructuring plan was bold: cut costs, streamline operations, and bring in fresh talent. The first step: letting go of the old. Ethan presented his restructuring plan at a board meeting, laying out his vision for the company's future. David Grayson, one of the oldest members of the board and a close friend of James, listened with growing concern. "Mr. Blackwood," David began, his voice calm but firm, "I understand the need to modernize, but we must not forget what made this company great in the first place. Employees like James Cooper have built relationships with clients that span decades. Cutting them loose could damage more than just our bottom line." Ethan nodded, but there was impatience in his eyes. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Grayson, but times have changed. We need to stay competitive. Loyalty is important, but it doesn't pay the bills. We need to be leaner, more agile." David frowned but said nothing more. Ethan's mind was made up, and the young CEO was not interested in the wisdom of those who had seen the company through its toughest times. David glanced around the room and saw the reluctance in some of the other board members' faces, but no one else spoke up. The meeting ended, and David watched as Ethan confidently strode out of the room, oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash. James spent his final days at the company in high spirits, unaware of the changes coming. He went about his routine, mentoring the younger employees, helping with projects, and sharing his wealth of experience. There was a sense of peace that came with knowing his long career was coming to a dignified end. His wife Hannah was equally excited about his retirement. They had made plans to travel, to spend time with their children and grandchildren, to enjoy the simple pleasures they had put off for years. One evening over dinner, Hannah looked across the table at James and smiled. "You've worked hard for so long, James. It's about time you took some time for yourself. Just think no more early mornings, no more deadlines." James laughed softly, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess I'm ready. It'll be nice to finally slow down, but I'll miss the people. You know it's been more than just a job." Hannah reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You'll still see them, James. They won't forget about you just because you're retired." James smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming just beyond the horizon. It was a Friday morning when James was called into Ethan Blackwood's office. He assumed it was to finalize the details of his upcoming retirement party. James walked in with a smile, but the moment he saw Ethan's expression cold, distant, his smile faded. "Have a seat, James," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. James sat, unease settling over him like a heavy blanket. "What's this about?" Ethan wasted no time getting to the point. "James, we're restructuring the company, and as part of that process, we've had to make some difficult decisions. I'm afraid your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The words hit James like a physical blow. He stared at Ethan, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "Eliminated," he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm retiring in just a few weeks." Ethan's expression didn't change. "I understand this is unexpected, but we have to think about the company's future. Your severance package will be processed, and we'll provide a transition plan to ensure the clients you've been handling are taken care of." James sat in stunned silence. 35 years of dedication, loyalty, and hard work gone in an instant. As James stood to leave, Ethan called after him. "I'll need your security badge, James." Without a word, James reached into his pocket and placed the badge on Ethan's desk. Then, with his head held high, he walked out of the office, leaving behind the company that had been his life for over 3 decades. The news of James' abrupt dismissal spread through the office like wildfire. His colleagues were in shock, unable to believe that someone like James, who had given so much, could be cast aside so easily. Melissa, in particular, was devastated. She had looked up to James, relied on his wisdom, and now he was gone. The office, once filled with life and laughter, felt cold and distant. James had been the glue that held the team together, and without him, everything felt like it was unraveling. James Cooper walked out of the office building for what felt like the last time, his mind numb, his heart heavy. The streets around him bustled with the energy of the city, but James felt disconnected, as though everything around him was moving in slow motion. The job that had defined his life for the last 35 years was over, not with a celebration or a fond farewell, but with a cold dismissal. Arriving home, he hesitated for a moment before opening the door. He knew Hannah would be waiting for him, her usual smile of encouragement lighting up her face. But how could he tell her that everything had changed in an instant? When he stepped inside, Hannah was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The scent of her home-cooked meal filled the air, but James barely noticed it. "Honey, you're home early," Hannah said, her voice filled with warmth. "What happened? Did the meeting get canceled?" James stood there, his throat tight. I got fired," he managed, the words sounding foreign as they left his lips. Hannah froze, her hands pausing over the cutting board. She turned slowly, her face etched with concern. "Fired?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "But you're supposed to retire soon." James nodded, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the betrayal hit him full force. "I guess that doesn't matter anymore. They said they're restructuring, cutting costs. My position is gone." Hannah hurried over to him, wrapping her arms around him as if she could shield him from the hurt. "Oh, James, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her heart breaking for him. You didn't deserve that. After all these years, he sighed, leaning into her embrace, but the sting of rejection lingered. I don't know what to do now, Hannah. I thought I had a few more weeks to wrap things up, to say goodbye properly. But they just tossed me out. Well, figure it out, she assured him softly, though there was a tremor in her voice. You've always been the rock of that company. They'll realize they've made a mistake. But James wasn't so sure. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly lost. Back at the office, Ethan Blackwood was feeling a surge of pride. The restructuring plan was in full effect, and he believed he had made the right moves to streamline the company's operations. As he walked through the office, he noticed the hushed conversations, the worried glances from employees, but he brushed them off. Change was always difficult, and he was confident that in time they'd see the benefits of his decisions. But what Ethan didn't realize was that the real damage was already done. In the accounting department, Melissa Rivers sat at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. The numbers in front of her blurred as her thoughts raced. James was gone. How was she supposed to navigate this huge project without his guidance? She overheard two colleagues, Tom Jefferson and another senior employee, whispering near the water cooler. It's unreal, isn't it? Tom said, shaking his head in disbelief. They fired James just like that. No warning, no send-off. After everything he's done for this company. It's wrong, the other employee muttered. The whole place feels off without him. Melissa bit her lip, feeling a lump form in her throat. It wasn't just about the work. James had been a mentor, a steady hand in a company that now felt rudderless. She glanced at his empty desk, the spot where his warm laugh used to fill the air, and she wondered how the office could ever feel the same again. Meanwhile, clients who had been loyal to James for years were beginning to take notice of his absence. One by one, the phone calls started coming in, clients asking for James, asking why they hadn't heard from him lately. When they were told that he had been let go, the responses were swift and not at all what Ethan had anticipated. We're rethinking our contract, one major client said. James was the reason we stayed with your company for so long. Without him, we're not sure we trust you anymore. The cracks in Ethan's plan were starting to show, but he remained confident. They'll come around, he told himself. Once they see how much more efficient we've become, they'll forget all about it. But as the days passed, the office's productivity faltered. People missed deadlines. Projects that James had been managing fell apart in his absence. Melissa was struggling to keep things on track, but without James' experience, the stress was mounting. Ethan noticed the tension, but refused to acknowledge the root of the problem. He called a meeting with the department heads, determined to keep things moving forward. We need to push harder, he said, pacing at the head of the conference room. We've had a few setbacks, but that's normal during a restructuring. What matters is that we stay focused on the future. But as he spoke, Ethan could see the doubt in their eyes. They weren't convinced. And deep down, a small voice in the back of his mind was beginning to whisper that maybe, just maybe, he had made a mistake. In the weeks following James' dismissal, the company began to unravel in ways no one had anticipated. The office, once filled with camaraderie and collaboration, now felt cold and fractured. People came in, did their work, and left without the usual banter or sense of belonging. Melissa, struggling to manage the increased workload, found herself staying late most nights. She missed James' calming presence, his steady hand guiding her through difficult projects. Without him, the pressure was overwhelming. One evening, after most of the office had gone home, Melissa sat alone at her desk, the glow of her computer screen casting a faint light on her tired face. She was trying to meet an impossible deadline, and nothing was working. Frustrated, she buried her face in her hands. I can't do this, she muttered to herself. Not without him. She thought about calling James for advice, but she stopped herself. He had his own life to worry about now. It wasn't fair to drag him back into the mess Ethan had created. Meanwhile, Ethan's troubles were growing. The financial losses were starting to pile up as more clients began to leave. The once-steady stream of revenue was dwindling, and the board of directors was getting nervous. At a tense board meeting, David Grayson was the first to speak up. Ethan, this can't continue. We've lost 3 major clients in the past 2 weeks, And it's no coincidence that this started after James was let go. Ethan, his jaw tight, refused to back down. This is just a transition period. We're modernizing, and there's always going to be pushback during times of change. We need to stay the course. David shook his head, his frustration evident. This isn't pushback, Ethan. This is a full-blown crisis. The relationships that James built over the years can't just be replaced with new hires. The clients don't trust us anymore, and neither do the employees. Ethan bristled at the criticism, but said nothing. The board wasn't ready to remove him, but the pressure was mounting. And for the first time since he'd taken over, Ethan was starting to doubt himself. At home, James was trying to adjust to his new life, but it wasn't easy. He had always imagined retirement as a time of relaxation, of finally enjoying the fruits of his labor. But this wasn't retirement, it was exile. He spent his days puttering around the house, fixing small things, trying to stay busy. But no matter what he did, his thoughts kept drifting back to the company, to the people he had left behind. One evening, as he was sitting in his living room flipping through the channels, his phone buzzed. It was Melissa. "Hi, Mr. Cooper," she said hesitantly. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all, Melissa," James replied, surprised but pleased to hear from her. "What's going on?" There was a pause on the other end before she spoke again, her voice tinged with anxiety. "I just am struggling. I don't know how to handle the clients like you did. Things are falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it." James' heart ached as he listened to her. He had known this would happen. The clients, the projects, they had all depended on relationships that couldn't be replaced overnight. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Melissa," James said softly. "It's not your fault. The way they're handling things. Well, it's not how I would have done it." "Do you think you could help?" Melissa asked, almost pleading. "Just some advice. I don't know how much longer we can keep things going like this." James hesitated. He didn't want to get involved, but he also couldn't stand the thought of his friends and colleagues suffering because of Ethan's decisions. "Okay," James finally said. "Let's talk. Tell me what's going on, and I'll see what I can do." As Melissa and James reconnected, the turmoil in the company continued to grow. The once confident Ethan Blackwood was starting to feel the strain. His plans to streamline operations and cut costs were backfiring. The fresh talent he had brought in was struggling to meet expectations, and the clients who had once been loyal to the company were now abandoning ship. Ethan stood at his office window, staring out at the city skyline, feeling a gnawing sense of doubt. His phone buzzed with yet another message from the board. More questions about the financial losses, more concerns about his leadership. He gritted his teeth, refusing to admit that his plan was failing. "They'll come around," he muttered to himself. "They have to." But deep down, Ethan knew the truth. His ambition, his drive to make his mark, had blinded him to the real value of the people around him. And now it was all falling apart. At home, James Cooper tried to settle into a routine, but his heart wasn't in it. He had always pictured his retirement as a peaceful time filled with gardening, traveling with Hannah, and spending more time with their children and grandchildren. But the abruptness of his dismissal left a sour taste in his mouth, turning what should have been a happy transition into something much darker. He found himself wandering the house aimlessly, trying to keep busy with small tasks, tightening loose screws, tending to the lawn, but none of it felt satisfying. No matter how hard he tried to move on, the weight of what had happened hung over him. The more he thought about how his years of service had been brushed aside, the more the sense of injustice gnawed at him. He missed the camaraderie of the office, the sense of purpose he felt every day. "James, honey," Hannah said one evening as they sat on the porch. She could see the tension in his posture, the way he stared off into the distance. "You need to let this go. It's not healthy for you to hold on to it like this." "I know," James sighed, running a hand over his face. I wasn't ready for it to end like that. I gave so much of myself to that company, and they didn't even blink before tossing me aside." "They made a mistake, James," Hannah said gently. "But you can't let their bad decisions ruin your retirement. You've earned this time to relax, to enjoy life." "I know," James repeated, but his voice was hollow. He appreciated her support, But it wasn't that easy. He had built something at the company, mentored people, cultivated relationships, and it was all gone now. Worse, the people he cared about were suffering because of decisions outside their control. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows over the yard, James felt a deep sadness settle in. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was unfinished business. Inside the company, the cracks in Ethan Blackwood's grand plan were becoming impossible to ignore. The restructuring had not brought the cost-saving, streamlined efficiency he had promised the board. Instead, it had driven away long-standing clients and left employees feeling disillusioned. The company was hemorrhaging money and trust. Melissa Rivers was one of many employees struggling to keep things afloat. With James gone, the guidance and mentorship she had relied on vanished overnight, leaving her overwhelmed with responsibilities she wasn't prepared to handle alone. Every day she walked into the office with a knot in her stomach, dreading the mess she would have to untangle. One afternoon, Tom Jefferson stopped by her desk, concern etched on his face. "How are you holding up, Melissa?" She let out a weary sigh. "Barely. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Everything's falling apart, and Ethan doesn't seem to care." Tom nodded grimly. "It's the same everywhere. People are scared. No one knows if they're going to be next." They both glanced toward Ethan's office, the door closed tight. There was a growing sense among the staff that Ethan was in over his head, but no one dared say it aloud. Everyone was too focused on surviving the fallout. Meanwhile, Ethan himself was unraveling. Each day brought more bad news, another client leaving, another project delayed, another board member calling to express their frustration. He knew things weren't working, but he couldn't bring himself to admit that his decisions had been wrong. His pride kept him from seeing the truth. But that pride was beginning to crumble. Late one evening, long after most of the office had gone home, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the financial reports in front of him. The numbers were grim. He had miscalculated, and now the company was paying the price. His phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. It was another email from David Grayson, the senior board member who had been skeptical of Ethan's plan from the start. The message was blunt: "We need to talk." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his failure pressing down on him. The success he had imagined when he first took over the company was slipping through his fingers. He had alienated the clients, the employees, and most of all, James, the one person who could have helped him avoid this disaster. For the first time, Ethan began to wonder if he had made a mistake too big to fix. The board meeting was tense. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his once confident demeanor shaken. David Grayson and the other board members watched him with thinly veiled disappointment as he delivered his latest report. The news wasn't good. Revenue was down, client trust had plummeted, and morale among the employees was at an all-time low. "We're on the verge of losing several more key accounts," Ethan said, his voice strained. "But I'm confident we can turn this around if we stay the course." David, always the voice of reason, spoke up. "Ethan, we've heard that before. The fact is, the company has been in a steady decline since James was let go. The clients trusted him. The employees trusted him. You broke those relationships without a plan to replace them." Ethan bristled. "We're modernizing. That's what's important. The old ways were holding us back." "But at what cost?" David pressed. "We've lost 25% of our revenue in just 2 quarters. How long do you think we can sustain that?" Ethan had no answer. The silence in the room was suffocating. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their doubts, crushing down on him. He had promised change, and all he had delivered was chaos. When the meeting adjourned, Ethan walked out of the boardroom with his head spinning. He had thought that cutting costs and bringing in fresh talent would save the company, but instead, it was sinking. And the board was running out of patience. Later that evening, Ethan found himself alone in his office once again. The financial reports spread out in front of him like a monument to his failure. He stared at the numbers, feeling numb. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that his way was the right way. He picked up his phone, hesitating for a long moment before dialing a familiar number. When James Cooper answered on the other end, Ethan's voice was small, almost unrecognizable. "James, it's Ethan. I need your help." James sat in his living room, the soft hum of the television in the background, as Ethan's voice echoed through the phone. He had never expected this call, especially not from someone like Ethan, who had been so arrogant, so sure of himself. "What do you need?" Ethan James asked, his tone calm but guarded. He wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. The wounds of his dismissal were still fresh. There was a long pause on the other end before Ethan finally spoke. "I messed up, James. I thought I knew better than everyone else. I thought I could change everything overnight, but I was wrong. The company is falling apart. Clients are leaving. Employees are on edge. I didn't realize how much everyone depended on you." James let the words sink in. He had been waiting for this moment, for Ethan to realize the damage he had caused, but hearing it still stirred something inside him. "I told you, Ethan," James said softly. "People aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about relationships, trust, loyalty. You broke all of that." "I know," Ethan said, his voice thick with regret. "And I'm sorry. I should have listened. But I need your help, James. I don't know how to fix this on my own." James closed his eyes, thinking about the years he had spent building the company, the relationships he had nurtured, the people who had relied on him. He thought about Melissa, Tom, and the others who were still stuck in the mess Ethan had created. It would be easy to say no, to let Ethan deal with the fallout of his own decisions. But that wasn't who James was. He cared too much about the people left behind. "It'll help," James said finally, his voice steady. "But it's not going to be easy, Ethan. And if I come back, things need to change for real this time." Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you, James. I promise I'm ready to listen." The next morning, James met Ethan in a quiet corner of a local diner, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Ethan, looking more haggard than James had ever seen him, was a far cry from the confident executive who had fired him just a few months ago. James laid it out clearly. "If I come back, Ethan, I'm not just fixing your problems. I'm going to make sure this company doesn't forget what really matters, the people who built it. That means treating employees with respect, fostering relationships, and focusing on mentorship, not just profit margins." Ethan nodded eagerly, his desperation evident. "Anything you need, James. I'll make it happen." "I want it in writing," James added firmly. "And I want to be in a position where I can actually make these changes, not just advise you." Ethan swallowed hard, knowing he was no longer in a position to negotiate. "Done. Whatever it takes." James studied Ethan's face for a long moment, searching for sincerity. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's get to work." James' return to the company sent a ripple of relief through the office. When he walked through the doors, people looked up from their desks with wide smiles, their expressions filled with hope. Melissa Rivers was the first to approach him, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I can't tell you how glad I am to see you." James smiled warmly, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "It's good to be back, Melissa. Now let's get this place back on track." As James made his way through the office, greeting old friends and offering words of encouragement, the weight that had hung over the company for so long seemed to lift. The clients who had been on the fence about leaving suddenly felt reassured, and the employees who had been struggling under Ethan's leadership now had a sense of direction again. Ethan watched from a distance, his heart heavy with both relief and guilt. He knew it would take time to earn back the trust he had shattered, but with James by his side, he was determined to make things right. James Cooper's return was like a breath of fresh air in the office. Employees who had felt lost without his guidance were eager to welcome him back, while Ethan Blackwood, though still wrestling with his pride, knew this was his last chance to save the company and his reputation. James wasted no time setting up meetings with key clients. His first step was repairing the relationships that had been damaged by Ethan's restructuring. He scheduled a call with one of the most important clients, Johnson Manufacturing, a company that had been on the verge of leaving after years of loyalty. Sitting in a small conference room, James dialed the number. Melissa Rivers sat beside him, notebook in hand, ready to observe how James would handle the situation. Ethan stood in the back of the room, quietly watching, his jaw tight with anticipation. "Hello, Mr. Johnson," "It's James Cooper," James said, his voice steady and familiar. There was a pause on the other end before Mr. Johnson's gruff voice came through. "James? I wasn't expecting this call. I thought you'd been let go." "I'm back," James replied calmly, "and I wanted to speak with you personally. I know things have been rocky recently, but I'm here to assure you that our values haven't changed. We still prioritize our relationships and the trust we've built over the years. I want to know what we can do to keep your business." Mr. Johnson was silent for a moment before he sighed. "I'll be honest, James. After you left, things went downhill. We didn't feel like we had anyone we could rely on. That's why we started looking elsewhere." "I understand," James said, nodding, though Mr. Johnson couldn't see him. "And I take full responsibility for that. But I'm back now, and I promise you that we'll make things right. We want to rebuild that trust." After a long pause, Mr. Johnson finally spoke. "All right, James. Let's give it another shot. I'll hold off on switching to another provider for now, but I'll be watching closely." When the call ended, Melissa let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "How do you do that?" she asked, her eyes wide with admiration. James smiled softly. "It's all about relationships, Melissa. People want to know they're valued. If you respect them, they'll respect you." From the back of the room, Ethan watched in awe. This was the power he had underestimated, the human connection that couldn't be replaced by numbers or new faces. With the first steps toward mending client relationships underway, James turned his focus inward toward the employees who had been left shaken by the company's turmoil. He knew that for the business to recover, the morale of the staff needed to be restored. James gathered the younger employees, those like Melissa, who had been thrown into leadership roles too soon, into a small conference room for an informal meeting. The room was filled with nervous energy, but James' presence had already begun to soothe their fears. "First of all," James began, standing at the front of the room, "I want you all to know that what's happened over the past few months isn't your fault. You've been put in a difficult position, and I know it hasn't been easy. But we're going to fix this together." Melissa, seated at the front, nodded, her expression one of determination. Beside her, Tom Jefferson, one of the senior managers who had seen the company through thick and thin, added his voice. "James is right. We've all felt the strain, but now we've got a chance to set things straight." James walked slowly around the room, making eye contact with each person. "What we need to do now is focus on rebuilding, not just our client relationships, but our relationships with each other. We're a team, and we're at our best when we work as one." After the meeting, the air in the office felt lighter. The employees, who had once been worried only about survival, now had hope. They saw a future where their hard work would be valued, where their voices would be heard. That afternoon, Ethan approached James in the break room, his hands in his pockets, looking unsure of himself. "James," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I just wanted to say thank you. I know I've made things difficult, but I'm starting to see what I missed." James looked at Ethan, studying his face for a moment before responding. "You're starting to get it, Ethan, but it's going to take more than just words. Actions matter. The people here need to know that things have truly changed." Ethan nodded, the weight of James' words sinking in. "I understand. I'll follow your lead." For the first time since their paths had crossed, James saw a glimpse of humility in the young CEO. The following weeks brought a sense of rejuvenation to the company. James worked closely with Ethan and the department heads to implement new policies aimed at fostering a positive work environment. One of the first changes was the establishment of a mentorship program, something James had advocated for. Melissa, now growing more confident in her role, took the lead in organizing the program. She had learned so much from James and wanted to pass that knowledge on to others. "Mr. Cooper," she said one afternoon as she and James reviewed the final details of the mentorship program, "this is exactly what we needed. I'm so excited to see it come to life." James smiled warmly. "You're doing a great job, Melissa. And remember, it's not just about teaching others, it's about learning from them, too. Everyone brings something valuable to the table." The mentorship program launched with a bang. Employees, both new and experienced, were paired together, and the office soon buzzed with collaboration and creativity. The barriers between departments that had once seemed so rigid began to dissolve as people shared ideas and worked together toward common goals. Ethan, watching from the sidelines, marveled at how quickly the culture of the company was shifting. He had been so focused on cutting costs and increasing efficiency that he had failed to see the bigger picture, the people who made the company run. For the first time in a long while, Ethan began to feel hopeful. The company was beginning to heal, and it was all thanks to the relationships James had spent years cultivating. Now, Ethan was determined to build on that foundation. As the office culture transformed, so too did the company's performance. Clients who had once expressed doubts about the company's future began to reconsider. The work James was doing, rebuilding trust, restoring relationships, was beginning to bear fruit. One by one, contracts that had been on the verge of termination were renewed. Mr. Johnson from Johnson Manufacturing sent an email to the team, stating that he was impressed by the turnaround and was happy to continue working with the company. James shared the news with Melissa and Ethan, who both smiled in relief. "That's the first real sign that we're headed in the right direction," James said, though his tone was cautious. "But we still have a lot of work to do." Ethan, sitting across from James, nodded. "I know, and I am committed to seeing this through." The board of directors, who had been growing increasingly anxious as the company's troubles mounted, began to see the results of the changes. At the next board meeting, David Grayson spoke up, his voice measured but pleased. "Ethan, I have to admit, I was skeptical of your approach after the restructuring," David said, glancing at James, "but it's clear that you've taken a step in the right direction. I'm encouraged by the progress we've seen over the past few weeks." Ethan, humbled by David's words, glanced at James before speaking. "I can't take all the credit," he said honestly. "James has been instrumental in helping us rebuild. Without him, none of this would have been possible." James smiled, appreciating the recognition, but he wasn't one for the spotlight. "It's a team effort," he said simply. "We've all worked hard to get here, and we'll keep working to make sure we don't lose sight of what matters." With the company slowly but surely getting back on track, Ethan found himself reflecting on his journey, on the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. For so long, he had believed that success was measured solely by profit margins, by the number of clients, and the efficiency of operations. But James had shown him something different, something deeper. One afternoon, Ethan asked James to meet him in his office. When James arrived, he found Ethan sitting at his desk, a notebook in front of him. "What's this?" James asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan smiled sheepishly. "It's something I've been working on. It's a personal commitment, a promise to myself and to the company. I've written down the principles you've taught me. Things like respecting people, fostering relationships, and never forgetting the human element in business." James picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. As he read Ethan's words, he felt a surge of pride. The young CEO, who had once been driven by ego and ambition, was now learning the value of humility and respect. "You've come a long way, Ethan," James said, setting the notebook down, "and I'm proud of you for that." Ethan nodded, his expression earnest. "It's because of you, James. You've been patient with me, even when I didn't deserve it. I won't forget that." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey hanging between them. There was still work to be done, but for the first time, they were moving forward together, partners in the truest sense of the word. As the weeks turned into months, the changes James and Ethan had implemented continued to take root. The mentorship program was thriving, and employees were more engaged than ever. Productivity soared, and the atmosphere in the office was one of collaboration and mutual respect. One afternoon, as James was walking through the office, he overheard a conversation between Melissa Rivers and one of the new employees. They were discussing a project, and James couldn't help but smile at the confidence in Melissa's voice. She had come so far from the uncertain young accountant who had once relied so heavily on his guidance. Now she was taking the lead, mentoring others, just as James had mentored her. Later that day, Ethan called a company-wide meeting to announce some of the final changes he and James had been working on. As the employees gathered in the conference room, There was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Ethan stood at the front of the room, his voice clear and steady. "We've been through a lot over the past year," he began, "but thanks to all of you, and especially to James, we're stronger than ever. I want to thank each of you for your hard work and dedication. And I want to promise that we'll continue to build on the values that have brought us this far." As the room erupted in applause, James sat quietly in the back, watching with a sense of pride. The company had weathered the storm, and now it was moving forward, stronger than ever. He had played his part, but now it was time to step back and let the next generation take the lead. When the meeting ended, Ethan sought James out, his face full of gratitude. "Thank you, James," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." James smiled, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "You've done a lot of growing, Ethan. I'm proud of you." As they shook hands, James knew that the future of the company was in good hands. Ethan had learned the most important lesson of all, that success wasn't just about profits or efficiency. It was about people. Months had passed since James Cooper returned to the company, and the transformation was undeniable. Employees walked the halls with renewed energy, collaboration flourished, and the once somber atmosphere had given way to one of excitement and optimism. Ethan Blackwood, now a humbler and more thoughtful leader, had fully embraced the changes James had championed. As James strolled through the office, he watched the younger employees, particularly Melissa Rivers, thrive in their roles. Melissa had truly come into her own, leading the company's newly formed mentorship program with confidence and grace. She had become a symbol of the company's future, a future built on the values James had instilled. One afternoon, as James approached Melissa's desk, he found her in deep conversation with a junior team member. The young employee was nervously explaining a challenge she was facing, and Melissa listened patiently, nodding thoughtfully. "You've got this," Melissa said with a reassuring smile. "Just take it one step at a time. And if you ever feel stuck, don't hesitate to ask for help. We're all here to support each other." James couldn't help but smile. It was as if he were watching his own approach to leadership reflected in Melissa. She had become the kind of mentor he had always hoped to be, and now she was passing that on to the next generation. As Melissa turned and spotted James, she waved him over. "Mr. Cooper, I was just telling her about how you always reminded us to focus on the people, not just the numbers." James chuckled softly. "That's right, and it looks like you're doing a great job passing that lesson on." Melissa beamed, clearly proud of the work she was doing. "It's all thanks to you. You showed me what true leadership looks like." James nodded, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over him. "You're the future of this company, Melissa. I couldn't be prouder." Despite the progress the company had made, there was still one final hurdle to overcome. Some of the older clients, who had watched from a distance as the company went through its turbulent changes, remained skeptical. While many had been won back by James' efforts, others were still hesitant to fully recommit. The largest of these clients was Richmond Technologies, a major account that had the potential to make or break the company's recovery. Ethan and James sat together in the conference room, preparing for a crucial video call with Mark Richmond, the CEO of Richmond Technologies. Ethan's jaw was tight with tension, but James exuded a calm confidence that was contagious. "Are you ready for this?" Ethan asked, glancing over at James. James gave a small nod. "We've done everything we can to show them we've changed. Now it's about convincing them that we're not just back where we were, we're better." As the call began, Mark Richmond appeared on the screen, his expression unreadable. "Ethan? James?" he greeted them tersely. "I've been watching your company closely since James came back. You've made some good moves, but I'm still not convinced it's enough to restore the trust we once had." Ethan took a deep breath, ready to defend their progress, but James raised a hand gently, signaling him to let him take the lead. "Mark," James began, his tone calm but firm, "I understand your hesitation. What happened earlier this year was a mistake, one that disrupted not only our internal operations, but also the trust we'd built with clients like you. But I'm back because we're committed to fixing that mistake and ensuring it never happens again." Mark studied James for a long moment before speaking. "You were always the one we trusted, James." That's why we stuck around for so long. But it's not just about one person, it's about the entire company. And that's exactly what we've changed, James replied. This isn't just about me coming back and patching things up. It's about creating a culture that values relationships, respects experience, and fosters growth at every level. We've rebuilt the company from the ground up, and that includes everything from how we treat our employees to how we approach our clients. Mark's expression softened slightly. It sounds like you're on the right track, but actions speak louder than words. Can you guarantee that we won't go through another period of instability, like the one we just experienced? Ethan, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. Mark, I won't lie to you. We can't guarantee that challenges won't arise. But what I can promise is that we've learned from our mistakes. James has taught me and the entire team that true success is built on relationships, not just profits. We're committed to that philosophy moving forward. There was a long silence as Mark considered their words. Finally, he nodded. All right, we'll give you one more chance. But don't make us regret it. When the call ended, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We did it, he said, a small smile forming on his lips. James nodded, though his expression remained serious. This is just the beginning, Ethan. Now we have to follow through. As the company's recovery continued, it became clear that James' work was nearly complete. The systems he had put in place, the mentorship program, the focus on relationships, the emphasis on employee well-being were thriving. Clients were returning, employees were happier, and the company was moving forward with a sense of purpose it hadn't had in years. With his mission fulfilled, James knew it was time for him to step back once and for all. His final day at the company had arrived, and Ethan insisted on throwing a grand celebration to honor his years of service. The office was filled with laughter and chatter as employees gathered in the large conference room, which had been decorated with banners and balloons in James' honor. At the front of the room, a large sign read, "Thank you, James, for your leadership and legacy." As James entered the room, a wave of applause erupted from the crowd. Melissa Rivers was the first to speak, stepping up to the podium with a smile that was equal parts joyful and emotional. James, you've been more than just a mentor to me. You've been a guiding light for this entire company, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Without you, I wouldn't be standing here today, leading projects and mentoring others. You've shown all of us what it means to be a true leader, and we'll never forget that. As Melissa finished, Tom Jefferson took the stage, followed by several other employees, each sharing stories of how James had touched their lives. It was clear that his impact had reached far beyond the walls of the company. It had shaped the people within it. Finally, it was Ethan's turn to speak. He stood in front of the crowd, glancing at James with a look of profound respect. I was wrong about so much when I first took over this company, Ethan admitted, his voice steady. I thought success was all about efficiency and cutting costs. But James taught me that true success comes from valuing people, from respecting their contributions and nurturing their potential. Ethan's voice thickened with emotion as he continued. James, you didn't just save this company, you saved me. You showed me what it means to be a leader, and I'll be forever grateful for that. As the applause died down, James stepped up to the podium for his final words. He looked out at the faces of the people he had worked alongside for so many years, his heart full. When I first started here, James began, I was just a young man trying to find my place. I never imagined that I'd be here 35 years later, surrounded by so many amazing people. This company has been my second home, and I've learned as much from all of you as you've learned from me. He paused, taking a deep breath. But now it's time for me to move on. I'm leaving this company in good hands, and I have no doubt that all of you will continue to build on what we've started here. Remember, success isn't just about the numbers. It's about the people. As the applause filled the room, James Cooper stood on the stage, feeling a profound mix of emotions. His journey at the company had come full circle. The once bright-eyed young man who had walked through those doors 35 years ago was now leaving behind a legacy that would live on long after he was gone. The faces of his colleagues, both old and new, reflected that legacy, people who had grown, learned, and thrived under his mentorship. Ethan Blackwood approached the stage with a gift in hand, a small token of appreciation. "James," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know no gift could ever fully express our gratitude, but we wanted you to have something to remember us by." James opened the box, revealing a beautifully crafted gold watch. Inside the case was an engraving to James Cooper, "In gratitude for your leadership and legacy." James smiled warmly as he ran his fingers over the inscription, appreciating the gesture. "Thank you, Ethan," James said, his voice soft but full of meaning. "But the truth is, I don't need anything to remind me of this place. The people I've worked with, the friendships I've made, that's what I'll carry with me. That's my real legacy." As the crowd once again erupted in applause, James stepped down from the stage. Melissa Rivers, her eyes glistening with tears, rushed over to hug him tightly. "I'm going to miss you so much, Mr. Cooper," she whispered. James smiled, patting her on the back. "You're going to do great, Melissa. You've got what it takes. Don't ever doubt that." One by one, his colleagues came up to shake his hand, give him a hug, or simply express their gratitude. James took his time with each person, offering them words of encouragement and leaving them with the wisdom he had imparted throughout his career. As the celebration began to wind down, James found himself standing near the exit, taking one last look at the place that had been his second home for so long. The company had changed over the years, but now, as he prepared to leave, he could see that it was in good hands. Ethan had grown into a leader who understood the importance of people, and the younger employees, like Melissa, were ready to take the reins. James felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. Tom Jefferson stood beside him, a wistful smile on his face. "You did it, James," Tom said quietly. "You turned this place around." James nodded, his heart full. "It wasn't just me, Tom. We all had a hand in it. But yeah, it feels good to leave knowing things are going in the right direction." The two men shared a quiet moment of reflection before James finally turned toward the door. "Take care of everyone, Tom," James said with a knowing smile. "They'll need you to keep things steady." "I will," Tom promised. With one last glance around the room, James stepped outside, feeling the weight of his long career lifting from his shoulders. The future stretched out before him, and for the first time in a long while, he was ready to embrace it. James settled into his retirement with a sense of peace and fulfillment he hadn't expected. The weight of his sudden dismissal had once cast a shadow over his future. But after his return to the company, he now felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that he had made a lasting difference. The company was stronger than ever, and the people he had mentored were thriving. In the months that followed, James found himself enjoying the simple pleasures he had once taken for granted. He spent quiet mornings sipping coffee on his porch, afternoons tending to his garden, and evenings with his family, things he had always been too busy to truly appreciate. Hannah, ever his anchor, noticed the change in him. "You seem more at peace these days," she remarked one afternoon, as they sat together in their backyard, the sun casting a warm glow over their garden. "I am," James admitted, his voice calm. "It's funny, I thought I'd miss the company more. But knowing it's in good hands, knowing that I did everything I could, that's enough for me." Hannah smiled, her eyes full of love and pride. "You left a legacy, James. You changed that place for the better." James nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. "I just hope they carry it forward. People like Ethan and Melissa, they've got what it takes to lead with the right values." And they did. James kept in touch with many of his former colleagues, especially Melissa. She had grown into a true leader, someone who balanced the demands of the job with the human touch that James had always valued. Under her leadership, the company's mentorship program flourished, and the culture of respect and collaboration became a hallmark of the organization's identity. One day, James received a package in the mail from Ethan. Inside was a letter, along with a photo. The letter was brief but heartfelt. "Dear James, I wanted to send you a little something to show our appreciation. The company is thriving, and it's all because of the foundation you helped build. We've created something to honor your legacy, something that will remind us all of the values you instilled. I hope you like it. Thank you, again, for everything. Ethan." James unfolded the photo. It showed the James Cooper Conference Room, a newly dedicated space in the company's headquarters, complete with a plaque that read, "In honor of James Cooper, where respect, integrity, and leadership meet." James stared at the photo for a long moment, a deep sense of pride welling up inside him. It was more than he had ever expected, more than he had ever thought possible when he first started at the company all those years ago. His legacy wasn't just a memory, it was a living part of the company's future. As he tucked the letter and photo away, James felt an overwhelming sense of peace. His work was done, but his impact would last far beyond his time there. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, James sat on his porch, lost in thought. The quiet hum of the evening surrounded him as he reflected on his life, his career, and the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about the ups and downs, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. His mind drifted back to his early days at the company, when he was just a young man eager to prove himself. Now he was an elder statesman of sorts, someone who had passed on his wisdom and experience to the next generation. The phone buzzed beside him, breaking him out of his reverie. It was a text message from Melissa. "Hey, Mr. Cooper, I just wanted to let you know that we secured another big contract today. Richmond Technologies is expanding their partnership with us. It wouldn't have happened without everything you taught me. Hope you're enjoying retirement." James smiled at the message, feeling a swell of pride. He knew Melissa was more than capable of leading the company to even greater success, and more importantly, she was doing it in a way that honored the values they had worked so hard to preserve. As he put his phone away, James leaned back in his chair, watching the last rays of sunlight fade into the night. The future was bright for the company, for the people he had mentored, and for himself. With the company thriving and his legacy firmly in place, James fully embraced the next chapter of his life. He spent his days traveling with Hannah, visiting their children and grandchildren, and enjoying the simple pleasures of a life well lived. But even as he settled into retirement, James never stopped learning. He volunteered at local community centers, offering mentorship to young professionals just starting their careers. It was his way of giving back, of passing on the lessons he had learned in his decades of experience. One day, as James walked through a local park with Hannah by his side, he spotted a group of young people gathered around a bench, discussing their future career plans. For a brief moment, James saw a reflection of his younger self in their eager faces full of ambition, yet still searching for the right path. As he passed them, he smiled quietly to himself. The journey never truly ended. There was always more to learn, more to teach, more to give. For James, the road ahead was one of contentment and purpose. His work at the company was done, but his work in life was far from over. A year after James Cooper's retirement, the company continued to flourish under the leadership of Ethan Blackwood and Melissa Rivers. The mentorship program, now a cornerstone of the company's culture, had become a model for other businesses in the industry. Employees at all levels thrived in an environment built on trust, respect, and collaboration. It was clear to everyone that James' influence had left an indelible mark on the company's identity. One bright morning, Ethan stood at the front of the conference room, preparing for a presentation to potential investors. As he glanced out at the room full of eager faces, he felt a familiar sense of calm wash over him. The nerves he used to feel before major meetings had faded, replaced by confidence in the values that guided him. At the back of the room, the James Cooper Conference Room plaque gleamed under the soft lights, a daily reminder of the lessons James had imparted. Ethan smiled to himself, feeling a sense of peace as he began the presentation. After the meeting, Melissa approached Ethan with a grin. "That went well," she said. "They loved our approach to leadership. I think we'll hear good news soon." Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "It's amazing, isn't it," he mused, "how everything changed once we started putting people first." Melissa smiled. James always said that was the key. It's easy to focus on the bottom line, but if you don't take care of the people who make everything possible, you'll never truly succeed. Ethan turned to Melissa, admiration in his eyes. "You've become a great leader, Melissa. James would be proud. Melissa's face softened. We all have James to thank for that. Later that day, Ethan and Melissa stood in the office hallway, watching employees move about their day with a sense of purpose and pride. It was a scene of harmony, of teamwork, of a company that had found its way back from the brink and emerged stronger than ever. I never thought I'd say this, Ethan said with a chuckle, but I owe everything to James. Without him, I don't know where it'd be. I learned more from him than any business school could have taught me. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. He left a legacy that will last for generations, and it's up to us to carry it forward. As they walked back to their respective offices, both Ethan and Melissa felt a renewed sense of responsibility to the company, to their employees, and to the values that had brought them back from the edge. The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but they knew they were equipped to face whatever came their way. In his quiet retirement, James enjoyed the simple pleasures of life. His days were spent tending to his garden, reading books he had long set aside, and spending time with Hannah. The weight of his former life in the corporate world had lifted, leaving him with a deep sense of peace and contentment. One sunny afternoon, James received a visit from Melissa, who had come to update him on the latest developments at the company. As they sat on the porch, sipping lemonade, Melissa recounted how the mentorship program had expanded, how employee engagement was at an all-time high, and how the company was growing at a steady pace. You wouldn't believe the changes we've made, Mr. Cooper, Melissa said, her eyes bright with excitement. Everything we're doing now is built on the foundation you laid. James smiled warmly. I'm not surprised. I always knew you and Ethan would make it work. You've become leaders in your own right. Melissa beamed. That means a lot coming from you. We've all missed having you around, but I know you're where you need to be now. James nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. I may not be in the office, but I'm always here if you need advice. Melissa laughed softly. I'll keep that in mind. We'll never stop learning from you, Mr. Cooper. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, James sat back in his chair, content. His legacy wasn't just a name on a plaque or a conference room dedicated in his honor. It was the people he had touched, the lessons he had taught, and the values he had instilled. The company was in good hands, and he had no doubt that it would continue to thrive for years to come. As time went on, James' influence continued to ripple through the company. New employees, many of whom had never met James, were taught about his principles from day one. They learned that success wasn't just about profits, but about the people who made everything possible. Ethan, now fully embracing his role as a leader who valued relationships above all else, often shared stories about how James had changed his perspective. In meetings with new hires, he would tell them about the time James had pulled the company back from the brink not by cutting costs or increasing efficiency, but by fostering a culture of respect, loyalty, and integrity. The company's board of directors, many of whom had initially doubted Ethan's approach, now praised the direction the company had taken. The financial reports showed steady growth, but more importantly, the company had regained the trust and loyalty of its clients and employees. As the years went by, the James Cooper Conference Room became a symbol of the company's core values. Employees who passed by the room were reminded daily of the man who had shaped the company's culture and the principles that would guide it into the future. Years later, James and Hannah took a road trip across the country, visiting places they had always wanted to see. As they drove through small towns and big cities, James often found himself reflecting on his journey, both the one he had taken in his career and the one he was on now. In each town, they would stop at a small cafe or a park, sit down together, and simply enjoy the world around them. James was at peace, knowing that the hard work he had put in over the years had made a lasting difference, not just in the company, but in the lives of those he had mentored. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a quiet beach, Hannah turned to James and smiled. "Do you ever miss it? The office, the work?" James thought for a moment before shaking his head. "No, not really. I gave it everything I had. Now it's their turn." Hannah nodded, understanding completely. "You did good, James. You left behind something special." James smiled softly. I guess I did. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the ocean, James felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His journey wasn't over, but this chapter of his life had come to a peaceful and fulfilling end. He had left behind a legacy that would live on, not just in the company, but in the hearts of the people he had touched. With his arm wrapped around Hannah, James watched the waves roll in, content in the knowledge that he had done his part. The future was bright for him, for his family, and for the company he had helped build. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, James whispered softly to himself, "I did my best, and that's enough." The long road to redemption concludes with James' peaceful retirement, content in the knowledge that he has left behind a meaningful legacy. His influence continues to shape the company, while the new generation of leaders, inspired by his example, guide the business with the same values of respect, loyalty, and integrity. Through the ups and downs, James' story teaches us that true success is not measured by profits or accolades, but by the lives we touch and the values we leave behind. Thank you so much for following James' journey in the long road to redemption. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story of leadership, mentorship, and the lasting impact of integrity, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more inspiring stories just like this. Leave a comment below about what part of the story resonated with you the most, and let me know if you'd forgive a boss like Ethan. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more powerful stories with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. More than you'll ever know. Tyler's smile widened, and for a moment, they stood there in comfortable silence, the weight of everything they had been through hanging between them. After graduation, Tyler decided to attend a local college, choosing to stay close to home while pursuing a degree in sports medicine. He had always loved baseball, but over time, he had developed an interest in the mechanics of the game, the science behind how athletes moved and trained. It was a career path that excited him, and Daniel was thrilled to see Tyler pursuing something he was passionate about. In the months that followed, their relationship continued to grow and evolve. Tyler was becoming more independent, and while Daniel sometimes missed the days when he was needed more, he was proud of the young man Tyler was becoming. There was still a bond between them that was unbreakable, built on years of trust, love, and shared experiences. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, Tyler working on a college assignment, and Daniel reviewing legal documents, Tyler looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever miss it?" Tyler asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. Daniel glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Miss what?" "Your old life," Tyler clarified. "You know, before me." Daniel set down his pen, considering the question. "I don't," he said honestly. "My life before you. It was empty. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was missing something important." Tyler nodded, his gaze dropping back to his textbook. "I guess I always thought I was the one who needed you. But maybe we needed each other." Daniel's chest tightened at the boy's words. It was true, he had spent so many years building walls around himself, avoiding emotional connections, but Tyler had forced him to break those walls down. In doing so, Daniel had found something far more meaningful than success or money. He had found a family. "You're right," Daniel said softly. "We did." Years later, on a warm summer day, Daniel found himself standing on the sidelines of a local baseball field, watching as Tyler, now an assistant coach for a youth baseball team, worked with a group of young players. Tyler had found his place in the world, combining his love for sports with his desire to help others. And Daniel couldn't have been prouder. As he watched Tyler move across the field, offering guidance and encouragement to the kids, Daniel realized just how far they had both come. The boy who had once been lost, angry, and alone was now a mentor to others, helping them find their way just as Daniel had helped him. Julia stood beside Daniel, her hand resting on his arm as they watched the game together. They had been married for 2 years now, and though their relationship had started in the professional realm, it had grown into something deep and enduring. Together, they had built a life that was full of love, laughter, and meaning. "You know," Julia said, her voice soft but teasing. "You've come a long way since those days in the office." Daniel chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, I have." He thought back to the man he used to be, the man who cared only about his career, who kept everyone at arm's length. That version of himself felt like a distant memory now, a shadow of the man he had become. As the game ended, Tyler jogged over to them, a wide grin on his face. "We won," he said, his voice full of excitement. Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Of course you did." They gathered their things and headed to the car, laughing and chatting about the game. As they walked, Daniel felt a deep sense of contentment, a feeling that had eluded him for so long but was now ever present in his life. He had found what he had been searching for all along, not in the courtroom, not in power or success, but in the family he had built, the love he had given and received, and the difference he had made in the lives of those around him. And as they drove away, the sound of Tyler's laughter filling the car, Daniel knew that this was the life he had always wanted, even if he hadn't known it at the time. He had found his purpose. He had found his family. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey with Daniel and Tyler. If you enjoyed the story and want to hear more heartwarming tales like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Daniel's transformation and Tyler's path to healing? Drop a comment below and let us know. Don't forget to like and share this story with friends who might enjoy it too. Together, we can spread more love and inspiration. But as people stopped to admire her paintings, offering compliments, and asking about her process, she felt a sense of validation she hadn't expected. One of the visitors to the exhibit was Professor Reynolds, the board member who had supported the changes at Brookwood. He paused in front of one of Chloe's paintings, studying it carefully. "This is remarkable," he said, turning to Chloe with a smile. "You have a real talent." Chloe blushed, feeling both proud and shy at the same time. "Thank you. It means a lot." As the evening went on, Chloe realized that she had found her place not just as a student at Brookwood, but as an artist with a voice of her own. The Carter family had been through a storm, but they had come out stronger on the other side. With the lawsuit behind them and Brookwood Academy on a new path, they were ready to focus on what mattered most to each other. One summer evening, the family gathered in their backyard for a barbecue, a tradition they had started before the chaos of the lawsuit had consumed their lives. The smell of grilled food filled the air as they laughed and talked, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Jasmine and Chloe sat on the patio, reminiscing about their first day at Brookwood and how much had changed since then. "I never thought we'd get through all of that," Jasmine said, sipping lemonade. "But here we are." Chloe nodded, her eyes softening. "I'm glad we didn't give up. It was hard, but we made it." Ethan joined them, holding a plate of burgers and hot dogs. He smiled at his daughters, pride radiating from him. "You two are the strongest people I know. You fought for what was right, and you made a difference." Vanessa, carrying a bowl of salad, sat down beside Ethan. She placed a hand on his arm, her expression filled with love and gratitude. "We all made a difference, and we did it together." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the backyard, the Carters sat around the table eating and laughing. The weight of the past year finally lifted. They knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. That night, as Jasmine and Chloe sat outside, looking up at the stars, they reflected on how far they had come. They had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of their place in the world. "I think we're going to be okay," Chloe said softly, her gaze fixed on the sky. Jasmine smiled, her heart full. "Yeah, we're going to be just fine." Months after the lawsuit had ended, the Carter family continued to move forward, both personally and professionally. Ethan's proposed bill on educational reform was gaining momentum in Congress, with support from lawmakers across the political spectrum. The bill aimed to establish nationwide guidelines for private school admissions, ensuring that no student would be discriminated against based on race, socioeconomic status, or background. On the day of the vote, Ethan stood in the Senate chamber, addressing his colleagues with the same passion that had driven him throughout the Brookwood case. "This bill is about fairness," he said, his voice steady but powerful. "It's about giving every child a fair shot at success. It's about ensuring that no student is ever told they don't belong because of the color of their skin. We've come a long way, but we still have work to do. And it starts here, with this bill." As the vote was cast, the bill passed with overwhelming support, marking a major victory in the fight for educational equity. Ethan, standing in the Senate chamber, allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The fight was far from over, but this was a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued to work on cases related to racial discrimination, using her platform to advocate for families facing similar challenges. She became a mentor to young lawyers, sharing her knowledge and experience to help them navigate the complexities of civil rights law. For Jasmine and Chloe, life at Brookwood had settled into a new normal. They continued to thrive academically, but they also made time for the things they loved: debating, painting, and building friendships with students from all walks of life. One afternoon, as the sisters sat in the school library, Chloe looked up from her sketchbook and smiled at Jasmine. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" Chloe asked. Jasmine thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't like to think about that. What matters is that we did fight, and because of that, everything changed." Chloe nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "We should be proud of that." "We are," Jasmine said, her voice filled with certainty. "We made a difference." As the sisters packed up their things and headed out of the library, they knew that their fight had been worth it. They had faced adversity and come out stronger, and they had helped pave the way for a future where every student, regardless of race or background, could walk through the doors of opportunity with their head held high. The road ahead was long, but the Carters were ready for it. Thank you so much for following the Carter family's journey to justice and equality. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about powerful narratives that challenge society, inspire change, and explore the human experience, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss out on new content. Together, we can continue to share stories that matter. See you in the next one. The police are on their way, Derek. You've lost. Derek's eyes darted around, realizing for the first time that the entire street was watching him. His bravado faltered, his shoulders tensing as he took in the growing crowd of neighbors, all standing together in a show of solidarity. For a moment, it seemed like Derek might lash out, might do something reckless. But then slowly, the fight drained out of him. His fists unclenched, his shoulders slumped, and with one last look at Edith filled with hatred and resentment, he turned and stormed back to his car. The street was silent as Derek sped away, his tires screeching against the pavement. Edith's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart still racing from the confrontation. She stood there for a moment, frozen, until Bill crossed the street and stood beside her. "You okay, Edith?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Edith nodded, though her legs still felt shaky. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to all of you." Bill smiled warmly, giving her a reassuring nod. "We're not going to let him hurt you, Edith. Not now, not ever." Edith's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of gratitude. She had been afraid for so long, but now, standing here with her neighbors by her side, she felt a renewed sense of strength. She wasn't alone. In the days following the final confrontation with Derek, the neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the sense of fear that had once gripped Cedar Street began to dissipate. Derek hadn't returned, and Edith had received word from the police that he was being closely monitored. They had issued a restraining order, preventing Derek from coming within a certain distance of Edith's home or the shelter where Rachel and the girls were staying. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough to give Edith peace of mind for now. Rachel called regularly, checking in to see how Edith was doing and updating her on their progress. The shelter had helped her find legal representation, and she was working towards securing full custody of the girls and filing for divorce from Derek. It was a long, difficult road, but Rachel was determined to keep moving forward. "The girls are adjusting," Rachel said during one phone call, her voice sounding stronger, more confident. "They're starting to sleep better, and we're getting used to our new routine. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free." Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel. You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbors, once strangers, had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith. Really, I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. I'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She too had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them." "That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now we have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better, now richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.